and we're here today looking at biosphere ecology and looking at the biosphere, which is basically just a global ecosystem. So let's start by looking at the breakdown, how it breaks down. It's just a basic overview, a quick overview of the hierarchy, and then we'll get more involved in each of the parts. So we start with an individual, which is basically just a species. And a bunch of individuals together is a population. And when you get a bunch of populations together interacting with each other, that is your community. So you go from individual to population to community. So these are all inclusive. The community includes the populations and the individuals. Then we go to an ecosystem. An ecosystem includes communities, which are populations and individuals, but it also includes how those communities interact with water and non-living parts of the ecosystem or of the system. Then you move up to biomes, and biomes are basically ecosystems, several different ecosystems together that are put together, and they have similar animals, plants, and mostly climate. They have very similar climates. So therefore, the same type of plants are going to live there, and the same type of animals are going to live there. We also, and then on the very end of it is the biosphere, which is global, everything, all the biomes together. So let's start. This is just another rendition of it. If you notice, you have the one species, and then you have your population, and then you have your community, which includes everything, and then you have your ecosystem. Now, the ecosystem will include this pond ecosystem and the grasslands ecosystem over here, and so when you put all those together, it creates the biome. Once again, biosphere is everything all together. So let's take a look at more specifically the populations. Okay, let's think about a population. Population is kind of like all the things that are the same. So we have a population of fish here. The definition of a population is one group of species that live in a specific area. They have to be living in a specific area. You could have two different populations, one that lives on one side of the mountain and one that lives on the other side of the mountain. They have very specific areas that they live in. They're two different populations. Now, what would we consider a specific area? What would we call that specific area where a population lives? It would be called a habitat. So it's the location where the population obtains its food, water, shelter, all the things that it needs to survive. You might want to make a note of that on your notes. There's a little spot there for you to put down notes on habitat. Make sure that you get that information. When I think of a habitat, I think of like it's like your address. It's like where you live. Then we have, and then as you'll notice on the notes, it says notes on a niche. So what is a niche? A niche is a particular role that a population serves in that environment. We're going to get more involved in that as the roles, and I know that you've probably heard all these terms of autotroph, heterotroph, consumers, that sort of thing. Those are its role. Its niche is very much like its job or its career, what it does in the world. It includes what it eats, what it's eaten by, its interactions with the environment. Does it live in water? Does it live on the land? Those type of things. Those are all what a niche is considered. So the next on your notes, you'll notice it says, what is the difference between an organism's habitat and niche? So take a moment and just answer that question for me, please. Okay, let's move on to community. Now, as I said before, community is your populations of many different organisms living in the same area. So in this community, we have our fish, which was our population, but we also have our rabbits, our turtles, our ducks, our frogs. We also have grass and probably bacteria that are living in the land here and algae living in the water. All of those make up the community. Here's the formal definition of community: different populations of organisms that live and interact. Here's my key word: interact in a specific area. When we are looking at communities, more than anything, that's what we're looking at, is the interaction between these organisms or these biotic factors. How does the fish get its food? Probably eating algae or insects. The rabbit interacts with the grass. The duck interacts with the duckweed that is in the pond. All those interactions. Sometimes, like, the bigger fish will eat the littler fish. Those are interactions. So when we talk about interactions, when we talk about interactions between organisms, a lot of times this is a community ecology. We talk about competition. Let's just say that the frog and the duck are in competition for the insects that are living there. They both have other forms of food, or they both have different niches because they have access to different areas of that pond, but there is a competition between them. The other interactions would be this would be um, harmful to both. Let's just put it this way: harmful to both. Then you have prey predator or parasite host, and with these, uh, one of the organisms is harmed and one benefits. Such as if you had prey predator, let's say you had the lion and gazelle. Lion would be the one that benefits, and the gazelle definitely would be the one that does not benefit. It is killed. Or a parasite host. Think of a tapeworm in a dog. The tapeworm doesn't give anything to the dog. The dog actually gets harmed because it's missing nutrients, whereas the tapeworm eats all the nutrients of the dog. It gets the benefit. And then we have mutualism. A lot of times you'll see this as symbiosis, um, where both organisms benefit. Okay, both organisms benefit from their from the relationship that they have, or the interaction that they have. Once again, this is just an overview, so you've probably already gotten into this in more detail, but it's just a little reminder as to what those interactions can possibly be. So I would like you to take a moment and answer the next question that's bolded, which is, what is the difference between a biological population and a biological community? There's the question there. What's the difference between a biological population and a biological community? You could also say ecological population, ecological community. The reason why we use that biological is because you can have a population, it can be used in many different contexts. All right. If you need more time, stop your video, and I think you guys are probably good at this. Um, let's go on to biotic and abiotic. I just want to do a little vocabulary before we move on to the ecosystems. You've probably seen this again, but let's just review. Bio means life. A usually means not. So if we have biotic, this would be living organisms or living factors. And if we have abiotic, it means not life or non-living. Um, when you talk about biotic and abiotic, it is very basic. The desk is non-living. The person in the desk is living. But let's also define it as far as ecosystems are concerned. In ecosystem, it is the biological influences within that ecosystem. So it is those community interactions. Those are your biotic factors. It is the biotics that interact with the abiotic and everything, but it is the biological features of that ecosystem. And equally, the abiotic is the physical and non-living factors that shape that ecosystem. Once again, you've probably seen these, but it is the wording, because a lot of times the wording will be difficult for you to get through, and that may, redefining it in another way may help you. Okay, what I would like you to do is, if you look at this picture here, what I would like you to do is give me some examples. Sorry, give me some examples of both of these. Um, just two or three on your sheet. You have them there if you're looking at this picture here. What are some biotic factors and what are some abiotic factors? We will go over those in class. We'll take a peek at some of the examples that you guys came up with. Okay, let's move on to ecosystems. Okay, let's define ecosystem. Ecosystem is the relationship of all the communities, which are biotic factors in an area, and the abiotic factors, such as water, air, land, soil. All of those things are considered abiotic, and it's the interaction between them. We're back to that word, the interaction between them. When we start talking about ecosystems, we are talking about the flow of energy through the system and the cycling of chemicals through the system. This is where it starts to get a little more tricky. The communities have their interactions, but those interactions are very much influenced by the abiotic factors that are available to them. So, um, take a moment. There's a question that says, where does the ecosystem get its energy? Where's the ultimate, where does the energy, so we're talking about energy in this, the flow of energy, but where does the energy start from? Before you move on to the next page, stop and think. Can you remember where that energy comes from in that system? Okay, let's move on to the next slide. This is energy flow through the ecosystem. If you'll notice, I have two different models up. They say basically the same thing. So we have detritus, which is what the decomposers eat. Okay, so it is basically the same type of thing. We have heat coming off on both of them. We have primary producers here and here, which are also called the autotrophs. We have the primary consumers, which are the herbivores. We have the secondary consumers, which are the carnivores. I don't know if you can see that. Let's do this over here. Carnivores. And up from here, sometimes, a lot of times, the omnivores will be in this section right here. Omnivores can go all the way up through. So the carnivores and omnivores are pretty much this group right here. Okay. Both of these systems, and this is, a lot of times you'll just see the triangle. You'll just see this triangle. You won't see you'll see the triangle, but you won't see all this other stuff on the outside. Very important is, ultimately, we get our energy from the sun. Both of these have sun. That is where the ultimate amount of energy, that's where our energy comes in. The energy comes in and is trapped by the producers or the autotrophs, the plants, the algae, those type of things trap that energy. They take that energy and they make it into energy that we can use. We can't use the sun's energy. So they trap it and make it. Now for each one, each time it says heat loss. Energy is lost as heat, and that heat is lost as far as digestion, all the things that you do, breathing, digestion, all of our systems that we use is lost in heat energy. We use it, but it's also gone. So there is something called the 10% rule. Now the 10% rule, does this mean that it's always 10% every time you jump? Only 10% moves up. Only 10% of the energy moves up to the next level. Does that mean that it's always 10%? No. Many times, depending on the system that you're working on, it may be 20%, it may be less than 10%, but in general, as a general rule, it's about 10%. So 90% goes out as heat energy. 10% moves to the next level. So you can understand why your top carnivores, you only have one or two of them because they don't have that much energy. By the time you move up, that energy becomes less and less. Very important too are the decomposers because each one of these dies, and if we don't have the decomposers to take apart those dead or those animals and plants that have not that are dead and no longer living, if we don't have these decomposers to put back those nutrients into the soil, then things would basically be dying. So the detritus is eaten by the decomposers. If we look here, we look at chemical cycling and energy flow. Energy flow goes from the sun to the producers to the consumers to the secondary and tertiary consumers, and all of them also go to the decomposers. The chemical cycle, which is what we were talking about with the decomposers, is chemically what they put back into the ground. So if a plant dies, when it gets broken down, all of those parts, all of those molecules are put back into the system so that they can be used by something else. Now, as we look at this, and this is something you guys have probably done a billion times, is the food chain and food web. So if I looked at this, I could make a simple food chain or food web. Food chain would be always starts with the sun, and goes to a plant of some sort, and goes to a herbivore, and goes to a carnivore. Now, on a food web, you have many, you have many food chains that interact with each other. All right, I am going to stop here. Once we get into this, as far as energy and chemicals, the chemical cycling, you start into the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and you also get into food webs and how they interact and what would happen if you take out an apex predator. What if you take out the plants? What would happen? The whole thing would collapse. But what about these guys in the middle? Sometimes when you start really talking about food webs, you start talking about biodiversity. That would be the next place that we would be going.